Hello and welcome to Tech Deal's System Upgrade Time. I have a Dell Optiplex i5-2450 system. This is 6.5 years old, 4 cores, 4 threads. They are an incredible value for the money. Yes, even today in 2017. Linked in the video description below will be some past videos I've done on this machine, as well as links to eBay to check out the current available deals priced lowest to highest for the i5-2400, the i5-2500, the 3450, and the 3470. That's the second and third generation processors. These machines can be had for about $100 to $150 depending upon how much RAM and how much hard drive comes with them, and they still play games, they still run Windows, they still do all normal PC tasks today very, very well. Now I'm upgrading the system for 2 reasons. Number one, many of you may have a system like this or be thinking of buying one, but you want to replace the power supply because you want to install a graphics card. Number two, you may be thinking, what about those new Intel 8th generation Coffee Lake chips? Is it worth replacing this and upgrading to something newer, or perhaps the new Ryzen 3 CPUs? In front of me, you'll see the pair of i3 CPUs that just launched, the 8th generation chip. These are 4-core, 4-thread chips. i5s in the 8th generation are now 6-core, but these are 4-core, 4-thread, just like the older i5s. The same thing is true with Ryzen. Ryzen 3 1200 and Ryzen 3 1300X, also 4-core, 4-thread. I'm going to be doing an upcoming comparison video where I test the new 4-core i3s against the 4-core Ryzen 3s and a 6.5-year-old 4-core i5-2400, all using the same graphics card, a GTX 1070, which is a very premium card, and frankly, in some respects, overkill for this machine. But all the computers have 16 gigs of RAM. All the computers have a GTX 1070. So the only difference between the machines is the processor. How well do the two brand new AMD and Intel CPUs compete against a 6.5-year-old machine? Now in just a minute, we're going to go overhead with the camera facing straight down, and I am going to show you the step-by-step process if you'd like to see it, how to do it on one of these older computers. But before we get to that, let me talk about the parts in a bit more detail. This is a mini single-fan GTX 1070. I've reviewed it and covered it in several videos in the past. It works really well in these kind of machines. The Zotac Mini has 2 fans and is also compatible with machines of this size. I will link to those down in the description below as well. As far as what power supply to get, some of the ones you see on the desk here are what I would recommend. This is the EVGA 500 watt 80 plus bronze power supply. They're available for around $40-ish or so. This is the Corsair CX series 600 watt power supply, also 80 plus bronze. It's $5 or $10 more than this one, but it has a little bit more power. Some people prefer EVGA, some people prefer Corsair. That's simply a personal preference. When you actually watch the installation, make note, I will hold up this power supply next to the one that Dell provides so that you can actually see the size. It's important that you don't try to overbuy your power supply for a machine like this because they don't fit. You need a standard ATX size, and either of these will work just fine. Again, I'll link to several of them down in the description below to both Amazon and Newegg. It is also worth noting that most of these machines originally came with 4 gigabytes of system RAM. Now that was fine back in 2011, but it really isn't today. You need 8 gigabytes of RAM, in my opinion, for eSports gaming or general Windows tasks, and 16 gigs of RAM for AAA gaming. Now I understand that 16 gigs of RAM currently costs more than this whole machine is worth. It's also true that this graphics card is overkill, I understand that. But I am testing with 16 gigs of RAM to match the systems with the new processors. But if you want to run with 8, many games will still run with 8 just fine. But I will link to RAM down below, both 8 and 16 gig modules, in order to upgrade one of these if you want. Now before we get started with the upgrade, let me address the elephant in the room. The $400 graphics card and the $100 computer. I know. I would not really actually recommend that you put this graphics card in this machine. Why am I showing it to you? Well, first of all, to show you that it in fact will work, but also to match it to the newer systems. What I would really put in one of these machines is either something like a GTX 1050 Ti or a 3GB GTX 1060. Those are by far the value option. At 1080p for esports gaming, a 1050 or 1050 Ti is all you need. Overwatch, League of Legends, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, Rainbow Six Siege, none of those games require more than a 1050 or 1050 Ti. Even AAA games, Ghost Recon Wildlands, Mass Effect Andromeda, Battlefield 1 will all play at 1080p on a 1060 3GB card. But I'm doing all of my testing with a 1070 to remove some of the graphics card limitations. I want to show more of the true CPU performance difference between the older i5 2nd gen, the new i3 4-core chips, and the Ryzen 3. If I limit the system with a lower end graphics card, then everything's just GPU bound, and we really haven't learned what's the best CPU. So that's really why that's going in here. I'll link down below to the 1050 Ti and the 1060s as well. And with all that out of the way, let's get to the upgrade. Here we have all the parts laid out on the desk. Now I have the box here just for representation. You can see the power supply and the video card here. We'll set those aside and get to work. The first thing to do is we're going to open up the side of the case and have a look inside. This is the Dell power supply that comes with our computer. It certainly does the job. You could certainly install a GTX 1050 or 1050 Ti without a problem in here. Most of those do not require a PCI Express power connector, but for a GTX 1070, we definitely will need one, and 1060s as well. Now, I already have 16 gigabytes of RAM in here, but if you only had maybe 4 or 8, you definitely want to add more. I recommend 8 gigabytes of RAM for eSports gaming and 16 gigabytes of RAM for AAA gaming. If you're on a budget system, that's not always possible, but that's what I recommend. On these old Dell Optiplexes, the first thing you want to do is make sure that you open up the back panel right here. This is just a small push down lever and it pops out just like that. You'll then simply remove the blocks that are in place, the little pieces of metal. One thing I do want to show you, I already had this installed. This is a $20 card that provides 4 USB 3.0 ports. These old 2nd gen machines do not natively support USB 3 if you want to plug in a flash drive or external hard drive. No power connector or anything else is required. For about $20, you get 4 USB 3 ports, and it installs in any of these 1X ports. Before we install the graphics card, we need to remove the power supply. We will take our screwdriver and undo the 4 screws on the back of the case. Here you can see the back of the case, 1, 2, 3, 4. We will undo these. Now, if you actually have it mounted up like this, make sure you support it because otherwise it will fall. Do it on the side. I'm only doing it here so you can see. And with the last screw out, you will notice that it now moves, but I'm going to put this back on its side. Now the power supply is disconnected from the case, but we also need to disconnect it from everything inside the machine. The first big connector you need to disconnect is the 24-pin ATX power connector. Be careful when doing this, and don't be afraid to remove a memory module if it's in the way. You don't want to push against this. So just to show you that, we'll push on both ends of this just like that, and it slides right out. I will set that aside, and we'll pull the other one out and set that aside as well. There is a push tab on the side of this power connector right here. Make sure you push that all the way in, and then simply rock it back and forth gently, slowly working its way out. And there we go. You don't want to do this gently. Don't pull too hard because these are often very tight and you don't want to break the board when you pull it out. So just rock it back and forth, support the board with your fingers if need be, and then pull that power connector out. There is an additional 4-pin CPU power connector right up here. Same thing, there's a small tab. Push that in and that pops right out just like that. There are additional power connectors here which normally go to hard drives. I don't have any hard drives installed here. Instead, I've got a solid state drive here in this bay, so we'll disconnect that power connector. With this power connector disconnected, everything is now removed. At this point, we can simply slide the power supply back gently, and then we can simply pull the power supply out. Just take your time when you're doing the cables so they don't catch on anything, and that's it. That's all there is to the power supply, just a few cables. There's much more on the new one, but this basically you can always save if you want to resell the machine, but these really aren't worth much. So once the new one's working, you can recycle this if you need to. I do want to show you something very important, and it's why I recommend these budget mid-range power supplies. This CX600 along with the EVGAs that I showed you before are standard ATX size. If you go up any higher than this, if you go to the super premium models, they're longer and they don't fit in the case. This case has pieces of metal and brackets designed to hold this size power supply and nothing else. I will have linked, as I said before, in the video description to multiple models of power supplies that will work in these machines. It's important to note when you're installing the power supply is that most of these can actually be installed this way or this way. So it's important to note where the fan is. You want the fan facing down here towards the computer. It'll take the heat from the system up to the power supply and blow it out the back. And so you are going to want to hold on and secure to the cables You don't want them hitting anything. And then we'll just slide it in just like this. With the power supply in place, now let's go ahead and secure the 4 screws. Our power supply is now screwed firmly in place. The main things to reconnect are the 4-pin CPU power connector, the 24-pin ATX, and then the power connector to our solid state drive. I actually do not have the DVD drive connected up. This is a standard DVD drive up here. I don't have any cables plugged into it because frankly, I don't use them. When placing the power connector back into the 24-pin connector, please be careful. There is no support under the board. If you just shove down, all you're going to do is break your motherboard. It is important to put your fingers behind the motherboard and support it and work in each side bit by bit. This may take you a few minutes to install. Take your time, don't crack your motherboard. The next power connector we need is the CPU power connector. However, this power supply comes with an 8-pin. This motherboard needs a 4-pin. Not a problem. This is actually a 4+4. It simply separates just like that. There's 2 little holding retention tabs. It pulls apart. You're only going to use half of it. The pattern is different between the sides. Short of using a hammer, you won't plug in the wrong side accidentally. So that power cable is in place. I've taken the extra and simply strung it into this empty 5¼ bay to keep it out of the way. I've also reconnected one of the serial ATA power cables to my solid state drive that is in here. That still leaves us with an absolute mess of cables. Now, there's only 2 here that you might need, probably just 1. In our case, we need a single 8-pin PCI Express power connector, which is provided by 1 cable, and we'll keep that there for the video card. The rest of these, I'm going to bundle up, turn over, I'm going to zip tie off, and shove into that empty drive bay. Here you can see I've used a zip tie to tie these up. I'm going to put them in here. Now, this is not pretty or elegant, but it does the job. If you cared about pretty cable management, you're probably not upgrading a 6-year-old Dell business machine with a fancy graphics card. It does the job fine. I have done 4 of these machines in the past. This is number 5. Okay, granted, this is the first time I've put a GTX 1070 into one, but I've put 1060s into others in the past. Before we install the video card, let's put our RAM back in. Very important with the system memory, the notch is not in the middle. Also, DDR3 and DDR4 have their notch in a different spot. Because this is a 2nd generation machine, this is DDR3. Each of these are 8GB sticks. You can see the notch right here. Make sure our tabs are pushed out to the side. These will pop up automatically when we insert the RAM. Simply line it up with the included slots and you simply push it down, click, and click. Take the 2nd memory stick, again, line it up with the 2 guides, slide it vertically straight down. There's no tilting at all. And 1, 2. Our RAM is now reinstalled. Now it's time to put in the graphics card. Do make sure that you've removed the metal tabs. This isn't from this case, but that's essentially what they look like, and they'll be sitting right here. Be sure to remove those from the back of the case. You'll need to remove 2 for most video cards. You can see here that we've got 4 ports that are going to go out the back. Your PCI Express slot itself lines up with the big X16 slot here. Make sure this is pushed down right here. It could be popped up. It will pop up automatically when we insert the card, just like these. The video card goes straight down and straight back up. It doesn't tilt at an angle. It doesn't tilt like this. Because of this metal ridge, you'll have to bring the card back a bit, go down, and then once this bracket clears, come over and line it up with the slot, just like so. And then simply give it a nice gentle push straight down, and the card's installed. Make sure your holes are lined up here on the back, and then simply lift this up. What I've run into is a common problem when dealing with pre-builts that were never designed for hardware like this. I was sitting here trying to close this, and this plastic tab is actually hitting the plastic shroud on the cooler. Yes, in theory, you could cut away the plastic from the cooler, but you really don't want to cut up your $400 graphics card. That would be terrible. And if you try to push this in, you're either going to snap this plastic or snap the plastic on the video card. Not to worry, there is a solution. There are 2 tabs right here. You can remove this shroud. There are screw holes. You can see right here. You'll need screws, but it is possible to simply screw the card into place and not have this toolless here. There will be a small gap back here, but it doesn't matter. And that's all there is to it. Simply pushing these in releases the pressure. In fact, I'll snap it back on. There we go. So keep this for future reinstallation. You simply have to push those out. But now there's nothing back here holding the graphics card. I'm just going to use standard screws to screw it into place. Okay, after a fairly long cut here, let me show you what we've run into. These holes do not have threads. They were never meant to have anything screwed into them. Notice there's a screw here. It turns out that if you do something I will tell you never to do, which is to use a power tool, you can make threads by taking a standard screw and simply forcing threads into it. Yes, that sort of does minor damage to the case, but it's a 6.5-year-old computer, so I don't care. So I do want to make sure that my USB 3 connector is screwed in. So I'm taking, I don't know if the camera will get that, probably not. This is a standard large format thread that is used for motherboard mounts and everything on the system. And I'm simply forcing the issue with power tools. Both of these are now screwed into place. Due to the lack of the support in the third slot right here, you'll actually see I bent the case just ever so slightly right here. If you don't have another card installed here, then that's not going to happen because you'd only have to put one screw. This screw didn't really bend anything, maybe a little bit. This did because there was nothing there. Now I'm doing something here that I normally tell people never do. Don't use power tools, don't use a lot of force in your computer. But this graphics card is blocked by that piece of plastic that I took out, so I'm doing a modification. What can I say? If this bothers you, then the Zotac GTX 1070 Mini may be a better solution. It has 2 fans and it's a bit lower profile. I used to have one. I sold it, otherwise I'd actually have swapped it out for the GTX 1070 Zotac Mini rather than the Gigabyte, which has 1 fan and is taller. So if that's a concern to you, I'll be sure to link that down in the description below along with the Gigabyte Mini. All that's left is to install our power connector. Now this is a 6+2, so you simply need to push them together. They don't clip together, you have to hold them together. And there's a clip here, just like all the other power connectors, and it slides right in. Now, you see all this extra cable? We'll just stick this right down here. Our system upgrade is now complete. We have a 600-watt power supply and a GTX 1070 installed in our i5-2500 extreme budget computer. And so there you have it, step-by-step detailed guide on how to install a new power supply and a new graphics card into one of these older pre-built machines. Now, as you saw there, I had some trouble with the size of the shroud here getting it in because of the height of the single fan card. As I mentioned, a 2-fan Zotac GTX 1070 Mini wouldn't have that problem. I used to have one, I'd have shown it to you, but I sold it. I can't afford to keep everything I review. I bought that with my own money, so I sold it to buy other stuff. Now, as I said earlier in this video, I don't really recommend you put a 1070 into this machine. Most of the single and dual fan 1060s and virtually all of the 1050s will not have that problem installing into these older machines. That's just the 1070 and its tall shroud here. Although I'll note that the single fan Mini 1060 from Gigabyte has this issue as well, but Gigabyte does have dual fan cards, their WinForce 1060s, which will fit in here just fine and don't have that height problem. So Gigabyte makes good cards, just this one doesn't fit as well as some of the others. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below. Questions and comments in the comment section, and as always, check out all the links in the video description. Did you find this useful, helpful, and informative? Please use those links when shopping. It really does make a difference. Now, you will be wanting to subscribe to my channel, hopefully, because the upcoming benchmark comparison will be very soon between this machine and the other 2 processors, as I mentioned, these and the Ryzen 3. Hopefully you find those useful and informative. You can also find links to my Twitch, Twitter, and Patreon accounts down below as well. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.